All right, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we were really excited when Doris said, hey, we want the beef board to come and talk at our meeting and explain a little bit about the checkoff, because I know there's probably a lot of questions about the checkoff and how it works and what we're doing. So I want to go over some of the kind of basics. Hopefully I'll answer some of your questions while I'm doing that, but we do want to save some time at the end for more questions. I think Doris has a list, and if there's more, if we don't have time, I'll be around at least till like 2 this afternoon, so grab me and we can kind of go over some of your questions here. So a lot of you, if you remember back in the 70s and early 80s and before, beef used to be the king of the proteins. We ate so much beef here. And then in that time, it started to decline. And I think there's a lot of issues related to that. Poultry was getting cheaper. But there was also a lot of negative information about beef out there, that fat and cholesterol was bad for you. You had E. coli outbreaks at hamburger chains. You had all these Beverly Hills diets that were like going towards this vegan attitude and movements. And so that really had a big impact on beef consumption at that time. So the industry knew we had to do something. So they got together and they said, how can we do something to help promote our product? And so they actually came up with several different ideas. So they had 3 tries during the late 70s and the early 80s to try to come up with a checkoff program. And the one that finally came through happened in 1985. It was part of the Farm Bill then. And basically it told USDA that we can develop this beef checkoff program. It had them set up their rules, which is the order, and it set the Cattleman's Beef Promotion Board, so the CBB. So this act is actually part of the law. So Congress had to pass it, and it is a law. So all the key information of how this checkoff works is in the law. Then what USDA did is they kind of added, I call it meat to the bone, some of the details of how the program works. And that's called the order. So USDA sets that up, and we can kind of do some changes on that. That can be changed, but the law can't unless Congress does something. So the program went into effect then in October of 1986. They started collecting the checkoff and started implementing programs. And so they were doing that, and after 22 months, they needed to have a referendum to vote, like, do producers want to keep this or not? So they had a nationwide referendum, and it passed. At that point, there was about almost 80% of the producers who said, yes, we support the checkoff, we want it to keep going. So that was, back then, almost 40 years ago. But like I said, the act is the law. So this is the hard part, because most of the key aspects of the checkoff are in law. It makes it very difficult to change. The order, the system, we can change, but it doesn't have as many details. So we update it, like we change the number of board members we have and things like that, which is done through the order, but not any of the big stuff like, the $1 per head. That's in the law, that it says every time an animal is sold, $1 is collected. But when they set this up, the goal was that they wanted this to be a national and state partnership. And we'll look, a lot of the state beef councils or the beef industry council like you have here were already in existence before the national checkoff started. And so they wanted to make sure that we could leverage all those state groups, but have a national group that would be on top that would kind of coordinate a bigger picture so that it would create economies of scale, larger promotions can be done, research can be coordinated instead of all these different states trying to do different things. So that state and national partnership was key. We'll talk about it a little bit more. The same with the grassroots engagement. So Doris was talking about like your members who are on the board. So it's producers. You've got them in this room. You guys are engaged with the program, whether it's on the national level or the state level. And it all ties in together, and we'll talk about that more too. And the other thing is they didn't want any tax dollars involved with it. So it's all program. So it's just, we don't use any tax dollars. This program's completely self-sufficient. There was also a question about like packers, like how come the packers aren't paying into this program? Well, they had thought about that, but when the originators to the program set this up, they purposely did not want packers on there because they know if packers are paying into this program, they're going to want to tell us how to spend that money. So we didn't want packers saying, we want you to spend this or do this. So instead, it was grassroots and producer funded. And the other key thing is we cannot do a lot of things on this program. We cannot do any lobbying We can't have like unfair or deceptive practices. We don't promote brands and things like that. The goal is to build demand overall for beef. We can do some brand marketing, but we have to have approval by CBB and USDA first, but that's a very, very tiny percentage. And the other thing is that we can't disparage another commodity. So as much as I feel like saying like, yeah, chicken tastes like crap and beef is awesome, I can't do it, unfortunately, because we don't have like the facts that say chicken tastes terrible. So it has to be all fact-based what we're saying, and we can't disparage other products. So like I said, our goal is to build demand for our product. Consumers have a lot of options out there. They've got other animal proteins, pork, poultry. They've got all these plant-based, meats or things, out there that are vying for the consumer's pocketbook. And consumers want more and more variety. So how do we keep beef center of plate so when consumers are out there buying, they're picking beef? And I think what we're seeing right now is that demand for beef is extremely high. Cattle prices are high, beef prices are high, and we keep wondering, when are consumers going to stop buying beef? It's too expensive. They're not. They keep paying this. And I think, I'm not going to say it's all a checkoff, but I think the checkoff has helped because the focus has been, how do we produce a high quality product with genetics and the different attributes, and then how do we promote it to the consumers out there, showing that it's delicious, it's nutritious, it's healthy, it's good for the environment. So these are a lot of the things that the checkoff has done. And we do that through 6 key program areas. So everything that we can do falls under this: promotion, research, consumer information, so information we get to consumers to educate them, industry information, that could be things like the BQA program, something like that, foreign marketing, and producer communication. So that's kind of the communications back to let producers know what's happening with the programs. So those are the key 6 areas that we really focus on and work. So we'll talk about our board a little bit. So I mentioned that we were created by law. So within that law, USDA has oversight over us. And what that means is that they're just making sure that we're following the law. We're not doing those things that I said we can't do. We're not disparaging other products. We're telling the truth. We're not lobbying, things like that. So when we put materials out to the public, USDA has to review them and approve them. And again, they're making sure it's not violating any of those rules. They do not tell us what we have to say. They don't say, you need to do this kind of marketing program, or you need to say this or this. They don't do that. So our programs and everything, again, are focused from the industry to drive demand, and USDA just says, yep, you're following the law. So then we, as the Cattlemen's Beef Board, we have this close relations with all the state beef councils. We oversee all those state beef councils to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, following the law and doing the things they're supposed to do. And then we also oversee the National Beef Checkoff Contractors. So these are the organizations that we work with, that contract with, that implement a lot of the programs that we're doing. So our board has 99 members, so it's a pretty big board. So I kind of look at this as Congress. So you're all, voting here for your representatives in Congress, but that doesn't mean that you're making a decision on how every tax dollar is spent or everything like that. You've got representatives there that do the work for you. This is exactly how we're set up. So the number of board members are representative based on the number of cattle you have in the state. So states with a lot of cattle have more representatives. You all have 4 producers. The first board member comes from the first 500,000 head of cattle in the state. And then for every million head after that, you get another board seat. So this means you all have at least 350,000, 3.5 million cattle in the state here. We also have importers. So importers, when they set this up too, they were like, well, we want the imported beef to be paying because imports have been coming in since the 1920s. But we didn't want them to have a free ride because that meat is going to be here. So if we're promoting beef and imported beef's coming in, they've got to pay their fair share too. So they do that. They have 7 members on our board right now. And the thing is, some people say, well, the importers are driving everything. And it's like, no, you've got 7 out of basically 100 people. They have no control over anything we're doing. In fact, the importers on our board have never even asked us to import or to promote foreign beef or anything. Sometimes I hear, what do you guys do when you're promoting, foreign beef? We have never promoted foreign beef, never. So we promote all the beef out there, but we don't have ever tried to say, here's Australian beef or whatever. We're promoting all the beef that's out there. And as far as the board members, for us on the staff, we have no say over who gets on our board. When USDA makes an announcement about here's who the board member, who the secretary has selected, that's when we find out who's on our board. So these board members are all appointed by eligible associations in the state. So the South Dakota Stock Growers is one of those eligible associations here. And as you heard Doris say, you guys submit names, and then those names can get selected by the Secretary of Agriculture, and they're on our board. So we have representatives from practically all different organizations out there who are on our board right now. So it's a very mixed. It's not just hand-selected by, staff or whoever. It's done by the Secretary of Agriculture. So our leadership, we have these 4 members. Ryan Morehouse, Cheryl DeVise, Terry Quam, Andy Bishop are our officer team right now. They're from Texas, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Kentucky. So they represent a pretty good geographic mix out there. And they do a good job. I mean, most of them, especially if you look at Andy and Terry, they run small family farm operations. Andy probably has maybe 40 head. Terry about the same. Cheryl's got a very small family farm as well. So we're not run by these big giant ranches or anything like that. This is family producers. Andy's actually a first-generation producer who's come in and built his farm on his own. So it's really a mix of different people who are on there. And then we talked about all the representatives we have from South Dakota, Orrin, Larry, Vebe, David. So again, they come from different aspects and different areas of South Dakota and represent you all on this board. So I hope if you have questions, ask me. If not, ask them. If they don't know, we'll figure out the answer for you. But they're very knowledgeable on the checkoff and how it all works. So there's actually about 24 different checkoffs out there. So these are initiated by the industry. They're not started by the government or anything. So if the industry wants it, they go forward and they submit it. So there's things like, pork that we have to go against, potatoes, lamb, but there's mangoes, watermelon, Christmas trees. There's a whole bunch of them out there. So the thing that's kind of aggravating is the biggest ag commodities out here in the country would be either beef or corn. Those are the 2 biggest ag commodities. But when you look at our checkoff, we're not the biggest checkoff out there. We're the 7th largest checkoff. So dairy's the biggest. And actually the dairy producers, when they sell their cattle, they pay into the beef checkoff too. There's soybeans, pork, cotton, milk, Hass avocados. So actually Hass avocados has more checkoff dollars than the beef checkoff, and they're pretty niche. So we're not the biggest one. You would think we're the biggest one because we're such a big industry, but we're not. So one of the challenges there, I think, is with our act, it's like $1 per head. It was there in 1985. It's $1 a head now. It hasn't changed. So you can see our actual collections as far as the blue slide, fairly steady over time. But the red line shows kind of our purchasing power. So $1 today is not worth what $1 was worth in 1985. So we're probably down to about really 33 cents on that dollar of what it used to be. So we have to be super efficient and utilize these funds very carefully and be transparent with it. And that's what we really focus on. So this looks a little confusing. It's not too bad. So how it works, if we start on the top left there, so let's say we're in South Dakota, and every time an animal is sold, $1 is collected, and that will be collected by the South Dakota Beef Industry Council. So they're that qualified state beef council. They then keep 50 cents for use here that you can decide, and then the other half goes to the Cattlemen's Beef Board on that national level. On the top right side there, that imported beef and everything that comes in, Customs checks that and they collect those dollars for the imported beef, and then that comes to the Cattlemen's Beef Board as well. So We handle that 50 cents and all the imported funds. On the state side, you guys can do whatever you want with that. You can spend it on programs here. You could donate it to a program in another state. You can join the Federation of State Beef Councils. On our side, all of the funding goes through the Beef Promotion Operating Committee, which will make funding decisions on that. And Vibi's been involved with that in the past as well. So she's one of those people who would help make those decisions. And that all goes for promoting and the product and research and everything. So as I mentioned, there were 43 states before the checkoff even started that had their own beef councils. So we worked very closely with them, and they wanted to make sure that they stay viable when this started. So their key role now is really to make sure that they're getting those checkoff dollars and passing that forward, and then working to implement those programs on the state level. But I think this is good because they're kind of that grassroots, boots on the ground here in each state, where we can be the overall bigger picture and provide research or resources and promotional materials that they can utilize by themselves and save money and have those economies of scale. So on the national side, we contract with different organizations. And this is where we run into, I know, a lot of questions and issues. So who can be a contractor to the checkoff? So it has to be a national industry-governed nonprofit focused on the beef industry, the cattle or beef industry, and you have to have been around for 2 years at least. And that's because they don't want just some group popping up and like, hey, we represent the beef industry. We want to get money, and then they go away or they don't do a good job. So those are the rules that are in the law. So these are the organizations. We have 9 organizations that we work with for programs. So the first, American Farm Bureau Foundation for Agriculture. So they do some really good programs, especially focused on education. They've created these complete training modules to use in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math programs in big school districts, especially in the big cities. So as you know, there's not as many farmers and ranchers out in the world as there used to be. We have so many people in the big cities who don't understand ag, so this helps get it in their curriculums to understand the impacts of the programs. We have the Cattlemen's Beef Board, so that's us. So we work on the producer communication. So materials like the drive, which I'll talk about later, and areas just to get that information out on how we're running the programs, how we're evaluating them, and what they're doing. We have the Meat Foundation, so they do work on some research, especially on food safety and like salmonella. You've got MICA. It's the Meat Importers Council. They actually don't do any programs, but they contract with the Northeast Beef Promotion Initiative, which really runs through a state beef council. And they do all the marketing and promotion in that Northeast corridor where you've got huge populations, like New York and all this, but very little cattle to try to market it. So they focus in that area. You've got the Meat Institute, which also focuses on a lot of programs that they do with sports and, again, reaching consumers in these high-density population areas. We have the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and they're our biggest contractor, probably also our most controversial, so I expect some questions from them. They do a whole bunch of different projects, promotion, research, you name it. They have different programs there. The National Institute for Animal Agriculture works especially with the CDC. The CDC had been trying to blame beef and animal agriculture for creating antibiotic resistance, and it's like all the animal ag's fault. Well, they've gotten in and really worked with them, and now they understand it's not our fault, and they're getting feedback on how we use antibiotics and everything in our production. We have the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, so they work very much with K-State to do the meat demand monitor, which really identifies what triggers consumers' demand for red meats, and then the U.S. Meat Export Federation that does all the international promotion for our beef around the world. And one thing that's important to note, like when you hear, like we say, okay, these organizations are going to get this much money awarded, we don't give them a check for that money right then. These organizations have to go out, they get approved for a specific program, they have to go out and they have to spend that money, then they submit the invoices and the cost to us, and we review them and we say, okay, does this meet the approved program? Does this meet the acting order and everything that they're supposed to do? And then only at that point do we reimburse them if it all meets all the criteria. So they all have to submit a program or a proposal that we call an authorization request. So this lists everything they want to do and the costs and everything that happens. So these authorization requests then go to what we call program committees. So every one of our 100 members is on one of these program committees. So these contractors explain the programs to them. There's also members from the Federation of State Beef Councils on there. So it's about 50-50, plus a few state beef council execs. We just had a meeting last week where they talked about, here's the new programs, here's what we want to do. All our board members and all these federation members then give comments and score these programs. These contractors now are going to take that feedback and adjust them to take this grassroots feedback they're getting and modify the programs then. And so they will then come back in September and they're going to present them to the Beef Operating Committee. So this is the committee that makes the main funding recommendations of what programs get funded. And so they'll present this. We have 10 CBB members, 10 Federation members on here. They'll present all of these different programs, and then that committee is going to put a proposal, a recommendation for what we fund. Now, some people think, well, oh, the Federation's on there. They're going to decide everything. No, we have 10 CBB members on here. And to get anything approved, you have to have 14 out of 20 to approve it. So there's no way, even if all Federation members voted one way or all CBB members voted one way, nothing's going to get done. So they have to do what's going to work and what they think are the best programs going forward. So they submit that. That will then go to the CBB Executive Committee. And if the Executive Committee doesn't like how it's funded, they can reject it and send it back to the Operating Committee. So CBB does have the final authority on what gets funded. And if the Executive Committee approves it, it goes to our whole board, and our whole board approves it, and then we send it to USDA and get it approved that way. So there are checks and balances to assure that there's safety here and that there's follow through to make sure nothing's just getting overrun. So this is our budget this year. I know the numbers are small. So by law, we can only spend 5% of the collections on our administrative costs. So that's in there. You've got administration at like $2 million about. And then the orange one on the right, that's research. And I can't even read the numbers from here. That's about 8.6 million. Foreign marketing's 8 million. Promotions, I think, oh gosh, a little over 9 million. So those are the key areas. Also the consumer information. Those are the key areas. The other budgets like supporting services, USD oversight, state services, program develop evaluation, those are all budgets that CBB sets. So our budget and audit committee sets these, and we do that independently. There's no other outside organizations that set this. Then we put together the program budget, which goes to these different categories like the research and all of that. And that's where the operating committee then decides how that portion should be allocated, and then CBB makes the final approval on it. So we do a return on investment study every 5 years by law. We have to do that. We just finished one last year, and we did it by Dr. Harry Kaiser from Cornell University. So this is a third-party independent review. He has no affiliation with us. We send out RFPs, they send them in. And so he looks at these. He has done quite a few of these different checkoff programs, so he has a pretty good process with these to be able to identify what's the impact. So he can take all the different factors, whether it's what was the GDP, what was the price of cattle, what was the price of beef, what were the price of pork, price of chicken, all these different things. What were consumers' incomes? And he can identify the different impact of those, including the checkoff, to say, here's what would happen if we didn't have the checkoff. And what he's found is that the checkoff does have a very big impact on beef demand out there for consumers. It's positive. More consumers are eating beef because of this. And in fact, every year we sell about 2.8 billion pounds more because of the checkoff. And if I just do my, kind of cowboy math on the back of the napkin, that equals about 5.6 or 6 million head of cattle per year. So if we didn't have this, there would be 6 million head less per year because the consumers wouldn't be wanting our product. So I think that's pretty impactful. He also found out that for the program, for every dollar we invest, we get about $13.41 back. So another big question I get is like, well, I put in $1. Where's my $13.41? Well, it doesn't mean I just give you $13.41 for everything. What that means is the impact to the industry of what we're able to do to build that demand is 13 times what we're putting in. So this is very significant. If it were like 20 cents here, then it would be like, okay, we're losing money. But we are having a much bigger impact than the amount we're putting in. So that is positive. And I think this is key too, that without the checkoff, steer prices would be about 8% lower per year if we had no checkoff. So if you look at your steer prices and you say, okay, what's 8% of that? That's your $13.41. Not exactly, but that's kind of the benefit you get back for that dollar because that price is higher. So there's a lot of other positive effects. So we're actually creating about $3.3 billion impact to the industry by adding jobs, increasing incomes for people, just adding taxes and things like that. We don't use any taxes, but we're adding about $750 million of taxes for state, local, and national government. So if the government's complaining about these, it's like we are helping you out because of what we're doing as an industry here. So this report, and I think this is a good report. This is very independent. We do not meddle with it. This is what what Cornell University came out with. You can scan it. It's on our website. We have hard copies available, but I think it's interesting. It brings you some good insight into the impacts of the program. Also on our website, if you go for drivingdemandforbeef.com, you can get more information about the Drive. I recommend you get the Drive newsletter if you don't have it. This comes out quarterly. It's free. It can be mailed to you, but it gives you updates on what the checkoff is doing. It keeps you updated on it. There's also an email version that you can get every month. So please subscribe to that. If you go to Driving Demand for Beef, you'll see where you can subscribe easily, but it gives you updates on what's happening. All of our financials are on the website. You can see it all there. Our audited financials are right there. All of the contracts that we have with those contractors are on there. So every one of those organizations that we work with, the costs, the programs they got approved, and their budgets are all listed on there as well. So you can see, what are we paying for research with NCBA? What are we paying for whatever, with these different contractors? It's all on there available. And if you have questions, call. I'm always like, we're here, we're available. We want to be transparent. We want to be good stewards because you all are the investors of this program. I know every time you sell an animal and you're putting $1 in there, that's $1 that you could have kept in your pocket. But you're not. You're helping the industry, and I want to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for your buck. So our focus at CBB is to make sure we're being efficient, make sure things are being done right, and getting the biggest bang for the buck that we can. So with that, I think we're going to open it up to some questions and go with that.
Thank you, Greg. Now, I apologize if I ask a question. I've been running around. I'm trying to listen to everything, so if it's a duplicate, just say we've answered it.
Okay.
These questions have been submitted by some of our directors and legislators, and I thank you for these questions because this might take a little pressure off you guys trying to come up with some questions. In the end, I will approach probably a couple of you, and if you have a question, we'll take it from the floor if I don't cover it here. So, the first one out of the gate, and these are in no order, but why are independent producer groups like RCAF excluded from checkoff contracting? To my understanding, RCAF does not apply for this as they feel the lobby group should not be involved.
Right.
Your comments?
Yeah, so like we said, groups that would be eligible for checkoff funding, I think RCAF would be eligible for checkoff funding if they wanted to do that. So we send out a notice every spring to probably about, over 100 different potentially eligible organizations that says, if you want to be a contractor for the checkoff, let us know. We'll get you in the process so that you can do everything. As of now, we haven't heard, RCAF has never asked to be a contractor, and it may be to what you say that RCAF's philosophy is that they don't think a policy group should be a contractor. I would say of those contractors we have, most of them probably have some type of policy arm, including, the Farm Bureau Foundation. They've got the Farm Bureau Federation, NCBA, USCA, Meat Institute. But our biggest focus, and I know this is a question, is like, are checkoff dollars being used to lobby or do these different policy things? And I can tell you that they are not. This is the biggest thing, and I can see people frowning, but I tell you, this is the biggest thing we focus on, is that those dollars do not go into lobbying. So they are used strictly for those programs that they got approved for. So.
That was my next question. How many, and I think this is done, how many CBB board members serve on NCBA or the Angus Association, and is this information disclosed publicly?
Right. I don't think any of our board members serve on the NCBA board. I mean, they couldn't, it would be impossible to do it just physically with meetings and stuff. So I don't think there are any. I think there's probably members who are members of NCBA, but they don't serve on their board. And then other organizations, we don't really track that, but I don't think we have many who are on the boards. I know we do have one who's on the Akaushi board, so some of the breed associations. I don't know anyone who's leadership in any of the Angus ones. I don't know, Vivi, if you know any, or David, I don't know. I can't think of any. So there's a pretty clear distinction. The challenging part that we have is that when you're on our board and you're speaking as a board member, also you cannot talk policy, what you think. So if, like, I don't talk policy, we don't push any policy, we're neutral, because if we were using checkoff dollars to try to go for a certain policy position, then obviously half the producers probably don't want that position. So no matter what we pick, we'd be pissing half the people off. So we don't even deal with policy. So our producers who are on the board, they can stay members of whatever policy groups they are, and if they're at their policy meetings, they can still talk about policy. They just have to be clear they're not representing CBB. So, David's here. He could be talking. He's at, stock growers meeting here. He has a policy position on it. He can say that because he is a member here. So, yeah, we don't limit what people can say or do outside of that.
Does CBB track how much checkoff money promotes imported beef under the Product of the USA label?
So we don't promote any foreign beef specifically. I know there's a question, and this is always a big topic, I know, is like, well, why are we exporting our beef? Why aren't we eating it, and why are we importing? And so on that one, I would say when we're exporting cuts, and I dealt with this for a long time, is we're exporting, and you'll probably say, I've heard this story a lot, but we're exporting a lot of cuts that we don't eat. So we could try to eat them, but like at lunch today, are we going to have liver and tripe? I don't think so. I think there's probably going to be some beef on the menu, would be my guess. So there's all these things that we don't eat. Like, how often do you guys cook up short plate? That's a big cut that you guys could be using, but we don't. We like steak. We like burgers primarily. We have a lot of corn-fed cattle, so we have a lot of trim that we need to use, fat, 50s, that if we didn't, it would probably be rendered. So we actually import lean trims, which is about probably 90% of the imports come in as that and are mixed in the fat, which brings a higher value for our fat, and it helps meet our demand for hamburgers. And I think as beef producers, we want to make sure that consumers can get beef if they want beef, rather than, we can't get it, we're going to go to chicken or pork, because we're going to see that erode more. So that I know is a big issue. We can talk more about later if you want, but we don't promote any imported beef, even though they pay in.
If this is truly a program to promote U.S. beef producers, why does the Beef Board oppose mandatory country of origin labeling?
Okay, so that I know is a hot topic here too. So that is a policy issue. We do not have any position on cool. I know there was discussions about like methane emissions or RFID ear tags or traceability. We have no policy on any of that. So that's why you guys have your policy groups like here. You can go to RCAF, you can go to NCBA, you can go to US Cattlemen's and talk about those policy issues. Like I said, if we try to do that, we're just going to be fighting each other on what those are. You guys can deal with the policy issues with your organizations, which I know don't always get along. But our goal is, how do we promote beef and keep beef front and center? So hopefully that's providing support for every producer out there.
Are you willing to support publicly available line-by-line audit of checkoff expenditures? And I think you answered that.
Right.
It's in here.
Yeah, hopefully you saw this impact report. I didn't talk about it, but this is a great report. We had some hard copies here. If you want one, we'll mail one. You can also download it online. But it breaks out all the different programs we have. It talks about how we evaluate them. It's got our financials there. You can get our full audited financials on the website. It goes into all the details. So all of that is available on our website.
So part 2 of that question, does this give us a breakdown of checkoff spending, actual promotion and education, as well as contractor salaries?
So it will have a lot of that detail. It doesn't break it down to contractor salaries. So most of the programs will have what's the program cost and what the implementation costs. So the implementation cost will include the contractors, office costs, salaries, things like that. Some are higher than others because, and I find this is a hard one to just say like, oh, if you have high implementation, it means you're inefficient, because it's not always true, because some contractors may have a low implementation cost, and then they'll work with a consulting company or something to do it. And that consulting company will always have like a 20% overhead cost, which you don't see. So it'll look like it's programmed, but it's not in the implementation. Another contractor might have experts on staff, like nutritionists or something, who do all this work directly, which would be more cost efficient than doing a consulting, a consultant nutritionist, and it will look like the implementation costs are higher. So those costs are on there, but I'd caution you by just saying like, oh, high implementation cost means it's inefficient. It's not that easy. And we are going to a new AR form. It will be not the current, we're starting FY26. It's going to be an FY27. But this new form is going to have a lot more details in it as far as what the objectives of the programs are, how they're achieving this, and there'll be some more budget breakout on that. So I know it doesn't solve the problem now, but we're moving in that direction and trying to continue to provide more transparency in that area.
Okay, now we're going to get to a sensitive subject here, as if we haven't already.
Uh-oh, this one's going to be really bad.
Has the Beef Board approved any checkoff-funded messages to promote or normalize electronic ear tag compliances under the guise of traceability?
Okay. You guys thought this is iced tea. It's really whiskey. So, no. So, and again, this is one of those issues that's more a policy issue. So again, we don't deal with any of the traceability issues or any of that. So that's, again, policy groups, so we don't have a position on that.
So the next question is, could you commit to opposing any mandate with the EID?
No, we wouldn't oppose or support one. Again, we're neutral. You as producers, again, we just want to promote beef. We want people to eat beef. You all, as producers in your policy side, you decide you're going to have to push what you want on all of those topics through your policy organization. So that's your job. And your job is to just keep making good beef like you're doing, and then we can keep promoting that. So.
Okay, I think I've got all mine. Do I have a question?
Well, first I want to commend you for doing a good job of breaking down the expenses and stuff for the Catleman Beef Board and stuff, or the checkoff. My question is on the makeup of your board. You had 7 representatives from imports, correct?
Right.
And you broke down for what requirements are for a state to have members on there. What are the requirements for an importer to have a seat on that board?
Right. So they have a similar. There's several nominating organizations for importers, and so basically they are typically companies that may be importing beef and are a member of like that Meat Importers Council. So they can then submit names that would go forward and the secretary would approve those. So kind of a similar process, but they're more like, they're going to be more company, like people that are dealing with imports coming in. Some big companies, some small, you get a pretty good range of organizations there as well. And I did forget to mention, like, all the members get a 3-year term, and then they can get reappointed for another 3-year term, and then they're off. So the most you can be on the board is 6 years total, and then we start over. So in a way, I think that's good because that keeps bringing in fresh people, and it doesn't let anybody get too entrenched. I'm sure you've been on boards where somebody's been there for like 50 years and they're trying to control everything. That helps stop that. But I don't know if that answered it on the import side there.
Right.
So.
Can I just say, so importers, they get people, it's per pound.
Right. Yes. Maybe that's the other part. So when they look at this, there's formulas that identify how many of this cut equals one animal, and then they calculate $1. And so they come up with the idea of like, how many cattle would this be? And so then that sets how many importers would be on our board based on that. And I will tell you that these formulas that they created were like made 40 years ago. And as you all know that, are there any importers in the room? I hope not. So as you all know, cattle are bigger, and we haven't adjusted that. So really, I think that the importers, if they wanted to, they could be like, we should have more board seats because, there should be like less or whatever. So they actually haven't done that. So it's been good. They still pay more dollars. Like they could say, 500 pounds is $1 instead of now it might be 400 pounds. So they would be paying a lot more than they do now.
Greg, I'm over here.
Wait, where?
This side, by the drinks.
Okay, sorry.
I have 3 quick questions, and then we are having beef for lunch. So here's
All right.
one.
Is it liver? Just kidding.
Just curious, okay, there's no doubt that Beef What's for Dinner was probably the best ad that ever came out. How come the Beef Board quit using an advertising agency that obviously had a good plan and went to mostly NCBA, which is not an advertising agency?
Right. And so, that's a good question. So I think what happened, there's 2 things. Like Beef It's What's for Dinner used to be more ubiquitous. When it first came out, it was everywhere. And part of that was, A, there was more money, and plus it was easier to advertise to consumers because there was like 3 TV stations, and you could hit everybody who's watching MASH that night or something. That's all changed now. Now there's hundreds of TV stations. So now when it's advertising, it's much more focused. So you may not see as much Beef It's What's for Dinner advertising because it's targeting mainly consumers in like the big metro areas, and it's on their cell phone and certain demographics. So they've kind of shifted towards that. And I think it's been a little bit of an evolution because NCBA used an agency, and then they had found that they could hire agency people from those same agencies cheaper. And now they still have some of those people with agency backgrounds, but I can't speak exactly why, but I think it's because they found that it's more cost effective to have the staff. And again, some have agency backgrounds, but it's not a total agency. Agencies are very, super expensive. So I think it's a cost savings issue as well. And I don't know if, I haven't asked them. I'd have to kind of check how that, I've seen the evolution, and I'm assuming that's kind of the reason. Yeah.
Right here's another one.
Uh-huh.
I've got a question on your 5-year study. It showed a $13.41 return on the dollar, right. But it did say to beef producers, which that would be Tyson, JBS, National, go on. Are they just showing that the beef producer made $13.41 and they're assuming the trickle down economics paid back to the people in this room that actually raised the cattle? Because I don't think we have any beef producers in the room. We produce cattle, and packing plants produce beef. So just wondering if there's a breakdown of what actually went back to the people that pay the check off.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I know this is another subject. I would say if you guys were raising cattle as pets, then you're cattle producers only because you're just going to have them out there like a dog. You have cattle that are going to be beef, so that's where we look at it as beef producers because that's their end, product. So when we say this, we say cattle producers, we do mean all of you in the room here. And that is the benefit to the people who are paying into the checkoff. So obviously there's also a benefit to the packers. They get benefit from the checkoff too, but this study did not try to quantify what benefit the packers are getting. So that study that came out looks at what, for cattle producers here, what that benefit would be to it. So.
It's like a steel company and an automobile company. You got a raw product and you have a finished product. We produce the raw product, which is cattle.
Right.
That's why I want to know if there's a breakdown that shows if there is any actual financial benefit back to the cattle producer.
Yeah, and that's it. We've tried to look at, how does it go back to a cow-calf or a backgrounder or a feedlot or whatever. And it's super difficult because even in South Dakota, how you guys, or if you're a cow-calf operator, how you do that and your costs and everything are going to be so different. And you try to amplify that across the country, it's impossible to try and say, okay, here's what it would be to cow-calf operators or whatever. So that's the challenge. We'd like to be able to do that, but it's just extremely difficult to tie it down. So this is really looking at what that benefit would be kind of from the cow-calf through the feedlot, that whole segment in there, and not the packers and retailers get a benefit too, I'm sure, but we can't get all of that benefit in there either. So.
Okay, last question.
Vaughn Meyer from South Dakota. First, I thank you for coming today and enlightening us on this. It's a very good presentation. I'm a former CBB member too, and some things seem like they've never changed, and that's what my question is about, is the fact that our largest contractor, who takes about 82% of their income from this checkoff every year, makes up their total income, seems to have 50% of the seats on the operating committee. What is that? That should be changed. When are they going to become a standalone organization or an independent organization?
Right. Yeah. And that's a good question. So the Federation of State Beef Councils, if you talk to the Beef Industry Council too, all the states contribute into the federation, and based on those contributions, they get seats on that. And so ideally, the people that you guys are sending are not NCBA people directly, but it's like a division of NCBA, which I know does not look good. So I see most of the Federation people, I think, are pretty good. I think they come in and they take off their hat and they say, okay, as producers, we're going forward on this. I agree, if the Federation were a separate, completely autonomous entity, that would make my life way easier. It would make all these discussions easier. That's not how it is right now, so I guess what we just have to do is we make sure that we are following what we need to follow. We try to make sure that everybody is being as neutral as possible. I think NCBA does good work on promotions and research and stuff. I know on the policy side, there's definitely differences of opinion. And so keeping that policy side separate can be hard when it's very, out there and very, in the public eye. So it's a challenge, and that's what we're focused on. And I know it's not a perfect system, but we're trying to make it work as best as we can. And I think it does work very good. But you're not going to make everybody happy 100% of the time. And I think that's with anything. And again, we try our best and answer questions and do things and try to move it forward. But no, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate everything you all do. Again, the beef we're producing here is amazing. I know you all take great pride in that and do a great job, and I just appreciate that. I want you to know we are doing our best to make sure that every dollar you invest is being used to the best. So anytime you want, call our office, ask for me, ask for our staff, and we're happy to explain things in more detail. Grab me here today. We are always available. Just call or email or whatever. So.
We've been giving knives out, but I know you have to get on the plane, so you get an ice cream scoop.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. He will be around till 2. There is brochures on the outside hallway table. The drive is out there. There's other things. Feel free to pick them up. As he said, contact him anytime for the office. I do have his personal cell if you need it.
Yep, no, I'll have it. If you want my card, I've got them over here, and it's got my cell number, so
Yes,
you can call
yes.
me anytime. Just don't call me in the middle of the night, please, but I will answer it if you call. So,
Okay, thank
yep,
you
thanks.
so much.
Thank you.
Okay,